Gunsmoke and Heartache, Book 2, Part 2 of the trilogy, a Western romance novella written by Lila Dawson.
Chapter 11. Edward Oliver. The morning after Bell's gathering arrived quietly, as though nothing of note had happened at all. Much to Harold's relief, and admittedly my own, we finally had the opportunity to do something other than another boring business meeting. The invitation came from Norman Riggs, a well-known investor in the city with a fondness for drinking at any hour. Harold said Riggs brought out the worst in him a time or two in years past. That alone made me wary. There'd be plenty of drinks and women, even at that hour, and Harold was particularly prone to the latter. I raised my concerns, but he happily accepted anyway, eager to prove himself, no doubt. I didn't argue too hard. I hadn't enjoyed a good card game in a while, and despite what poker once meant in my life, I still trusted Harold. "Harold," Mr. Riggs said, slapping him on the shoulder as we walked in. "Haven't seen you in years." "This your brother?" "Sure is. The legendary Edward Oliver himself," Harold replied, slapping Mr. Riggs on the shoulder in return. "You two don't look anything alike," he said, laughing and slapping me on the shoulder too. Clearly, he did this to everyone. "I'll take that as a compliment," Harold said, elbowing me. "Pleasure to meet you," I said, shaking his hand firmly, unsure whether I meant it. "Well, sit down. Sit down. Everyone's here except that old stick in the mud, Frederick Bell. He's never agreed to play with us, but after I told him I'd invited the two of you, he was suddenly eager to tell me about his fondness for poker and that he'd postpone his previous commitments." The other men at the table laughed, though it was good-natured. The men there didn't seem to dislike Frederick Bell. Robert Henry also sat at the table, notably the only one who didn't partake in the laughing. Harold and I sat. I quickly took a seat that allowed me to face the door. Another of my habits that didn't mean as much anymore. I had no gun on my hip to defend myself either way. "Should we wait for Fred?" another man asked, though he hadn't introduced himself. I gathered he was a personal friend of Norman. "He hates being called Fred," Robert said, the first semblance of humor from him thus far. "He'll be even angrier when I take a few dollars out of that big wallet of his," Norman said, cutting open a brand-new deck of cards. "Let's go ahead and start. I'll deal him in when he gets here." I had a sinking feeling. Frederick didn't seem like the kind of man who would ever be late. He'd be early to his own funeral if he could. I tried to put the anxiety aside and played through a few hands. 20 minutes later, he still hadn't arrived. Facing the door, I was the first to see Samuel Morrison walk in. He avoided making eye contact, which made me all the more nervous. "Gentlemen," he said, tipping his hat. "Samuel, what brings you here?" Norman asked. "Mr. Bell won't be able to make it today. He asked me to deliver his apologies and to take his place. You can deal me in." Norman raised his eyebrow. "Good. Maybe you can do something about Edward Oliver here. He's won 2 of the 3 hands we've played so far, and I'm starting to think he has some history with the game we're not aware of." "That's so," Samuel said, pulling out a chair. "What's keeping him?" Robert asked. "Yeah, well, your grandson fell over and bumped his head this morning," Samuel said. His tone made it sound like weather. "Frederick is disciplining his wife and servant over the incident." Robert's jaw tightened. He didn't look up from the table. I held my breath. Maybe this would be the moment the man decided to act like a real father. "I see. I'll check on my grandson later. How to handle a household should be left to the husband," he said evenly. I wanted to put the man's face through the table in front of me, more than I'd wanted most things in my life. "Let's go," I said under my breath to Harold. "Ed," Harold said, his voice tight with concern, though he made no move to stop me and was standing before even I was. "Gentlemen, Family matter. We'll return." The two of us left, and I'd expected Samuel Morrison to follow, but he didn't. He remained seated at the table like nothing had happened. Unlike Robert Henry, he was in no position to intervene, and had likely seen and done far worse on Frederick's behalf. We didn't know what we'd find at Belle's house. We didn't even know if we'd be allowed through the door. But I couldn't stay seated while Tabitha suffered. We arrived at Belle's residence a few minutes later, unsure of what to expect. I immediately heard Tabitha's distressed voice, and it made me forget the overwhelming ache pulsing through my leg. My cane had barely touched the ground on the way here, and Harold had difficulty keeping up with me. "Please! She had nothing to do with this!" Tabitha shouted. We turned the corner and found them in the garden out back, tucked behind tall hedges that shut the world out, thick enough to muffle sound, high enough to keep prying eyes away. We hadn't arrived in time to stop it. We'd arrived in time to witness it. Frederick stood over them with a thin switch in his hand. He was soaked in sweat, disheveled, his hair a mess, and his shirt half pulled from his pants. Camilla was on her hands and knees, and Tabitha crouched over her, holding her face tight to her chest. Frederick drew back and struck Camilla across the back. She barely reacted. Whether from shock or practice, I couldn't tell. "Oh, I disagree. She was there with you. Was she not? Since you seem to care more for the safety of these servants than your own son, maybe I should hurt Camilla more so you understand." Tabitha pulled Camilla closer and turned, putting her own back between them. Frederick drew back the stick, searching for an angle to strike Camilla again. Harold held my arm, and I couldn't tell whether he was trying to stop me or himself. I couldn't blame him for not knowing what to do here. Truth be told, I didn't either. If we stepped in now, the fact is we could make things worse, and probably would. "Please stop," Tabitha screamed. He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her away from Camilla and onto her back. He stood over her, the stick raised above his head, gripped tightly in his trembling hand. "Useless woman." I couldn't take it. This might ruin everything, but I'd choke the life out of the man myself before I watched him hit Tabitha with that stick. Just as he was about to bring it down, I grabbed his wrist. He turned to me with his eyes wide, ready to explode on whoever dared to intervene. When he saw Harold and me, he seemed to regain a sliver of his sanity. "Inside," Harold said as he pulled Tabitha up by the hand, then steadied Camilla under the arm and guided them toward the house. He didn't go in with them, but when he glanced back at me, he was suddenly more concerned for what was happening between Frederick and me than the women. He tried to pull away from me, but I tightened my grip. Our eyes stayed locked. "Ed!" Harold pleaded, already moving toward me. "Ed!" I reached with my other hand and pulled the stick from Frederick's hand and drove him back hard enough that he stumbled to the ground. I drew back the stick when the doors opened, and an unfamiliar man rushed out, doctor's bag in hand, breathless, eyes darting. "Gentlemen, please," he said, his voice low. Frederick's attention snapped from me to the man, and he hurried to his feet. I tossed the stick aside. "Is my son all right?" "Mr. Bell, your son is perfectly fine. I can appreciate how much you care for the boy, but I suggest you resign yourself to the fact that children get bumps and scrapes regularly. More than likely, the swelling will go down and it'll be like it never happened within the week. Just wait until he starts walking and running." Frederick glanced between Harold and me, then to the doctor, running his fingers through his hair and nodding. He was much calmer now. "Thank you, doctor. I'll send someone to take care of the bill this afternoon." The doctor nodded, then left in a rush, either to see the next patient or to leave the awkward situation he'd found himself in. "That was really nasty, what you just did," Harold said. "You're lucky my brother and I showed up when we did, or you'd be looking even more foolish right now." I saw a glimpse of the rage that instantly boiled in Frederick, but he swallowed it down just as quickly. "You're right. You're right. I owe both of you my thanks. should have handled my emotions better. Benjamin is my only son. I was relieved that Harold was doing the talking. I had not yet calmed down enough to open my mouth and not regret what came out of it. Or worse, that I might not be able to still my hands again. "I'll go and check on them," he said, taking a step toward the door. Harold stopped him. "Leave them be," Harold said, and I heard the deliberate shift in his voice, the smooth, agreeable tone he reserved for men like Frederick. "You know how women are. Give them a few hours to settle and they'll forget it ever happened. There's still plenty of money on the card table. Come join us and relieve some stress." If I hadn't known Harold the way I did, I might have believed he meant it. What he said didn't matter, but the outcome did. He wanted to keep Frederick away from them in case his temper flared again, and give them some time away from him. The last face Tabitha would want to see right now was Frederick's, apology or otherwise. "Can't argue with that, can you?" I added, finally composing myself again. Frederick nodded, smoothing his shirt as though he could smooth the moment with it. "Gentlemen, you're right. A few hours away will do me good."
Chapter 12. Tabitha Bell. I sat on the edge of my bed next to Camilla. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, no matter how hard I tried to steady them. Camilla was much calmer, but I could tell by her breathing that she was fighting the pain. "Let me see," I said in a shaky voice. "I'm fine," she said, laughing uncomfortably. "This is far from the worst thing I've been through." "That doesn't make it better," I said. "It makes it worse. Let me see." She sighed, slowly unbuttoning her blouse and letting it fall to her waist. Several raised welts lined her back, a couple of them bleeding. I retrieved a wet washcloth from the basin and gently wiped. "That's not necessary," she said. "You shouldn't have done that." "What?" "You know what I mean. Claiming you bumped into Benjamin by mistake when you were walking by. You were nowhere near him." "He's a baby, Tabitha. He rolled off a cushion onto carpet. I'm surprised he even got a bump. You were no more at fault than I was." "That's not the point." "There is no point," she snapped, pulling up her blouse and buttoning it. "He was overbearing before Benjamin, but I fear becoming a new father has broken the man completely. This has become a dangerous environment for you to be in." "Sorry. Instead of criticizing you, I should be thanking you instead," I admitted. Whether I agreed with her didn't matter. She'd put herself between me and an enraged Frederick. Something that, with her status, might have cost her a lot more than a few welts and bruises. "Ah, that's better. So nice to be appreciated. You're welcome." She laughed, stretching her arms before turning to face me again. "We need to do something sooner. I'm worried this slow and steady plan we have may take too long." I peeked out the window, making sure no one was approaching, before heading to my closet, pulling back a loose board, and retrieving a small box. I set it on the bed between us, and we briefly went over the contents. If Frederick were a normal man, this would be enough to put him in prison for years, but dozens of illegal transactions and a few blackmail letters threatening to expose an affair aren't going to be more than a minor inconvenience to him. Once you expose yourself, it will be the only opportunity you have. If we fail, he'll have you committed to an asylum. And I doubt I'd be so lucky, she said, shaking her head and placing the lid back on the box. What should we do if things get worse before we're prepared? She shrugged. We could always approach his rivals. Someone looking to ruin him and who had the money to back the effort could do far more with this information than we ever could. They might even be able to help you secure a divorce. With conditions. Men like that do love their conditions, don't they? Yes, I'm not sure we'd end up better off in the long run, though, speaking of sympathetic businessmen, Not them, I said, anticipating what she was about to say. And why not? You're being unusually stubborn about this. I saw it with my own eyes today. Edward probably is who you think he is. And that's the reason I could never involve him in this. I've put him through enough already, and besides, even if he is here with the same goal, I'm not the woman he wishes he were rescuing. I've changed too much. I have nothing to offer him, and he needs to be spared the hurt of realizing that. Forcing conclusions on another person for their own good is a bad habit, my dear, she said, smiling in spite of my growing irritation. And I should thank you too. You put yourself between us just when he was getting really riled up. I think those next hits would have been a lot worse. We protect each other, I said, wrapping my arms around her. After hearing her wince and realizing a hug probably wasn't the best idea right now, I rested my hands on her shoulders instead. Like friends ought to do, right? As friends ought to do, she repeated, nodding to the box between us. Best to put that away. As if on cue, a knock came at the door. I rushed to the closet, clumsily sliding the box back into place, shoving the loose board into position. Come in, I said. The door opened and another servant walked in carrying Benjamin. Susie. A nice enough woman, but someone I'd rarely spoken to in all the time she'd been here. She was someone who spent the day in silence, then went home. Her parents had both been slaves, and sadly, despite supposedly being a free woman, she wasn't faring much better. Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Bell, but I believe this little one wants his mama. He hasn't stopped cuttin' a shine. I held out my arms. Thank you for taking care of him, Susie. She gently gave him to me, and he immediately started to calm. Mrs. Bell, don't let nobody tell you you ain't a good mama. She winked, then left, closing the door quietly behind her. I rocked Benjamin slowly in my arms, wiping at his red cheeks. She's right, you know, Camilla said. I know, I agreed, reluctantly. It was hard for me to remind myself that I wasn't a bad mother when every other sentence my husband spoke to me was to point out where I'd failed our son. Even though he had so many of his father's features, I couldn't help but love even those as his mother. He deserves better than to grow up this way, the way I did with my father. I paused, realizing that Camilla likely had a far more difficult life than I'd had. Sorry, I shouldn't complain so much. I imagine your life wasn't any better. Camilla laughed, tapping Benjamin on the nose with her finger, surprising both of us with a laugh in return. If only another's worst suffering erased our own. If that were true, only one person in the whole world would ever suffer. You're right, I said, wiping away the lingering tears from my eyes. As usual, she said. As usual? Come on, let's go get you a replacement blouse. No, thank you. I want to make sure I'm wearing it when Frederick gets home as a reminder of what he did today. I think once the doctor spoke to him, even he felt a tinge of guilt. Who knows? Maybe he'll even apologize to you. I don't want his apology, I said. I would if it meant something. If he does apologize, accept it graciously. Otherwise, he'll take it as another provocation. I sighed. I'm tired of playing these games, Camilla. Patience, my dear. We'll figure it out. I hope so, I said, lowering my voice to a whisper as I watched Benjamin nod off to sleep in my arms.
Chapter 13. Edward Oliver. The card game felt like a special kind of torture. I sat at the table, thumbing my cards around in my hand without any real desire to look at them, watching Frederick laugh and joke with the other men like he hadn't just beaten the tar out of 2 women with a stick an hour ago, like everything about the entire day had been perfectly normal. My hands were still shaking, and I had to grip my cards tighter to hide the fact. Harold was doing what he did best, talking. And taking it upon himself to do the talking for both of us. With my shaking hands, I didn't quite trust my voice to be steady just yet. Every time I blinked, I still saw him standing over her, holding that stick. I still felt that promise of satisfaction I was going to get out of breaking it over his face. Despite all my effort to change, it was hard to come down from. "Your bet, Ed," Norman said. I tossed the cards on the table in front of me, face down. They got the message I'd folded and probably all assumed I was just annoyed by the bad hand. Truth is, I had no idea whether the hand was bad or not. Harold shot me a concerned glance, but said nothing. I got the hint, though. His eyes seemed to tell me to pull myself together, so I tried. "Tough luck," Norman said, shaking his head sympathetically. A woman approached, leaning on Harold's shoulders from behind, craning her head around so she could look him in the eyes. She was a blonde woman, and everything I'd ever expected from a woman who recognized Harold, gorgeous from head to toe, and happy to display that fact for everyone to see. Emerald eyes the color green you'd expect to see on jewels in the middle of one of these tables, the kind of eyes a man learned to look away from. "Hello, Harry. I've missed you." Harold smiled, turning his head to look at her. "Very sweet of you, Nancy." "You remember my name," she said, feigning surprise. "I remember a lot about you. Can I expect to see you later?" "No, ma'am," he said, adding an almost painful sorry. "Don't tell me I've gotten too old for you, Harry," she said, pouting. "You're just as stunning as the first day I saw you." Still, the answer's no. Afraid I only go into places like this for cards these days. You can join us if you're about to go on break. Things are just starting to get good." She sighed as she stood straight, rolling her eyes before leaving the table. No one said a word, finding they had less to say in the awkward silence. Harold winked at me. I grinned, making sure he knew I was proud of him for doing something he certainly couldn't have done a couple of years ago. Norman raised a brow, quite surprised. Robert Henry sat across from me, equally quiet, obsessively swishing his whiskey around in his glass like he'd been doing for a solid hour. He knew. He knew everyone at the table had seen him choose propriety over the safety of his own daughter, while two strangers, Harold and myself, successfully went to her aid and dispelled the whole situation peacefully. Something everyone knew should have been his task as her father. Worst of all, he knew that everyone else in Silver City will know. These men weren't nobodies. This wouldn't stay at the table. Men here would tell their wives, and their wives would talk amongst themselves. Robert was, no doubt, playing it over and over in his head. Frederick, on the other hand, was in good spirits despite everything that had happened. Relieved his son wasn't actually hurt, and perhaps genuinely grateful we'd stopped him from staining his own reputation. Despite the social expectation for a woman to serve her husband, no one respected a wife-beater. Those who did tended to keep to their own kind, and as a businessman trying to reach everyone, Frederick couldn't afford to be walled off from the greater community. "So, Edward," Frederick said, laying down his rare winning hand with a smile, "your brother said you've been giving a lot of thought to some of our proposals. Now was the time to get it together, so I put every bit of my focus into doing it." By some miracle, I smiled and spoke evenly. "We have. I apologize that it probably looks like we're dragging our feet on this, but you have to understand that this is a significant partnership. Lumber is one of the greatest needs of a railroad, so a good deal or bad deal could completely change the future of our company. When faced with a deal like that, we need to assess not only the resources on offer, but the moral character of the man offering them." Frederick paused a moment, clearly feeling the sting of the last sentence. "Something your father was well known for saying. He's a lucky man to have both sons grow into men who resemble him so much. Certainly I should strive to be the best man I can be so my son can do the same. Harold smiled and nodded. Every man has his shortcomings. The whole city knows about mine. It helped smooth the conversation over, but he certainly wasn't lying. The interaction with the woman a few minutes prior demonstrated that. "You've been awfully quiet, Robert," Norman said. "Just concentrating on the game," he replied, not even looking up from his meager stack of chips. No one pressed the matter, and the game continued. Harold kept things light, ordered everyone a round of drinks, and made jokes. Samuel apparently had a reputation for silence because no one questioned his lack of participation in the conversation. I started taking the game more seriously. 2 hours later, everyone was starting to tire out, and most were running out of chips. "I should probably head home now," Frederick said, having just lost the last of his chips on a poorly timed all-in. "Be sure to take Edward's chips, all right?" he added with a laugh, slapping Samuel on the shoulder. Only Samuel Morrison and I still had chips, and everyone else was tired of watching us play. Even Harold was getting antsy. "All right," Norman said. "If I don't get going, my wife's going to hunt me down." He was wobbly on his feet as he rose, clearly having drank too much through the game. Robert Henry simply left without a word, already halfway out the door before Norman had even finished speaking. "Do us proud, Ed," Harold said, nudging me before walking away with Norman. Samuel grinned at him, nodding as he placed another cigarette between his lips and struck a match, quickly filling the table with smoke. He waited until everyone was gone before speaking. "Ready to play for real?" he said, the cigarette bouncing with every word he spoke. "Sounds like a threat," I said. I grinned and he laughed, pushing a stack of his chips to the center of the table. "Something big's coming, Mr. Oliver. You and your brother need to be on your guard. No threat. Call it sharing a bit of insider information as a gesture of good faith." "Something big? We don't need to hire bodyguards of our own, do we? Like you'd need to." "But no." He shook his head, more serious now. "I don't rightly know. Just Frederick's gotten a little too obsessed with you and your brother. He's writing to men he used to say were too unsavory, beneath him. Doesn't take a smart man to see where that's going." "Nowhere good," I said. "If you get anything more specific, we'd appreciate it, but a heads up still helps. I owe you one." He shrugged, taking a particularly long draw from his cigarette. "I always move in my own interest, Cowboy. Nothing to thank a man for." I nodded, shoving the rest of my chips into the center. "All in," I said. He looked down at the chips, then back up to me. He laughed, nearly dropping his cigarette. "All in rarely works out for the man who says it first." "That's been my experience too," I said. "But yep, all in." He looked at his card several more times before reluctantly matching me, sliding the rest of his chips to join mine. We both paused, savoring the moment, then flipped over our cards. I had 2 pairs, 4s and 8s. He flipped his cards over. 2 pairs, kings and queens. "Looks like I take the pot," he said, scooping the chips to his side. He paused and seemed to momentarily go into deep thought. A second later, he laughed, beginning to carefully stack the chips. He looked me in the eye and I knew he'd caught on. "Thank you kindly, Mr. Oliver." I'd thrown the last hand as a gesture of appreciation for the heads up without making it obvious. "Have a good day, Mr. Morrison," I said, standing and exiting the saloon. Harold and Norman were still outside in the street, talking up the old days, so much for rushing home to appease his wife. Norman was one of these men who, with a few drinks and a good conversation, just couldn't pull away. "Good seeing you, Norman," Harold said. "Oh, come on, Ed. You're empty-handed." I shrugged. What can I say? You can't win every game, but I came close. "Fine. I won't make fun of you too much," he said, putting an arm around me and steering us back toward the hotel. Norman waved and went in his own direction. Samuel Morrison thinks something's up. Frederick's been doing some digging beyond his normal business stuff. Enough that he thought it was worth telling me. Harold slowed down, pondering. Think he's going to try a blackmail angle? Or maybe he's looking into your past. If he looks hard enough, he's going to start putting the pieces together. That would take time, he said. Unfortunately, all that did was turn our strategy in on itself. He has time if we keep giving it to him, but I don't think we can do that anymore. I was hoping we could play a longer game, maybe work on some small deals and come back to the city in a few months to play it safe. But after what we saw this morning, after what we saw this morning, it just can't wait much longer. He's forcing our hand with how unstable he's been. Besides, I'd bet anything he's monitoring our communications in and out. Otherwise, I'd ask Father for some advice. You're probably right about that. We're on our own here. You did good today, by the way. Gave me a run for my money. With the cards? I asked. No, Ed, keeping your cool. Right. You did good, too. With what? He asked. Nancy's hard to look away from, I said. Even I'll admit that. Let me tell you, that ain't even the half of it. You have no idea how deep I had to dig to find the willpower. I laughed. I don't need the whole story. You sure? I don't mind telling it. I have no doubt about that, I said, increasing my pace. Spending 2 years in the world of high-stakes business, I was starting to get paranoid. I wondered how much of that was even a coincidence. I'd lived long enough knowing coincidence was just what men called danger before they saw it coming.
Chapter 14. Tabitha Bell. I was in the dining room, rearranging decorations when I heard a knock at the door. Far too insistent, like someone was trying to put their fist through the door. Susie answered it, and I immediately recognized my father's voice. I'm here to visit with my daughter and grandson, he said. My stomach tightened. I finished squaring up the 2 candles on the table in front of me, composing myself before I had to face him. Hello, Mr. Henry, Susie said in her usual jovial voice. I'll let Mrs. Bell know you're here. She appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting to something apologetic. She knew I was never happy when my father visited, as did everyone else, it seemed, except my father himself. Thank you. Show him in, I said. I stepped around the corner as my father entered, not bothering to offer him even a false smile. He looked uncomfortable, and part of me hoped he was feeling guilty for not coming by yesterday. Though I knew better. Tabitha, he said. I wanted to check on Benjamin. I heard he had a nasty fall. Benjamin is perfectly fine, I said. You don't need to worry. Hearing the conversation, Frederick spoke from the hallway. Tabitha, do we have a guest? We do, I replied. A moment later, he joined us, looking at Robert with a blank expression. Robert, I wasn't expecting you. I came to check on my grandson, he replied. That's considerate, though I would have thought this visit would come yesterday. My father's face reddened. I thought I'd give you the space to handle your own affairs without me intruding. Frederick nodded, glancing at me, then at my father. He was seen by a doctor and is doing well. As Tabitha told you, there's no need for concern. Frederick turned to leave, but Robert spoke up before he could take a step. Good. My father shifted his weight from one foot to another, like a shy child waiting for someone's approval to speak. While I'm here, Frederick, I was hoping we could discuss those lumber rates we spoke about recently. Frederick took a deep breath, his expression going somehow colder than it already was. Lumber rates? Yes, the preferential pricing we discussed, given our relationship. Our relationship? Frederick said, a hint of a smile on his lips. Because of your daughter? If I wasn't sick to my stomach before, I was now. Here it was again. I was being openly talked about like cheap currency by two men who had always believed they owned me. First one, and then the other. Yes, of course. We're family now. You're my son-in-law. Surely that counts for something in business. Frederick sighed, seemingly open to hear more. What exactly are you hoping for? Give me a number. We need a lot of replacements, as well as a large order for supports for the expansion we're doing in the spring. I was thinking, with the large volume, 15% would be very fair to both of us. 15%? Frederick laughed, surprised. Very funny. What's the real number? Given the circumstances, I think 15% is perfectly... Circumstances? The circumstances being that I took your unruly, unfit-to-marry daughter off your hands, married her myself, gave her a life of complete luxury, and am teaching her with great difficulty how to be a good wife and mother. Those are the circumstances? My favor to you does not entitle you to steal from my business. The red on Robert's face instantly went a shade darker. I'm not trying to steal. 15% is blatant theft. I offered you 5% once before, the same as I offer others who take it with gratitude. 5% barely makes any difference. Then take your business elsewhere, Frederick said, his voice rising sharply, though still not a full shout. Even in his anger, he was mindful that Benjamin was asleep just 2 rooms over. I'll be eager to hear which of my competitors offer you better terms. The redness of father's face turned to purple, and he was visibly trembling. You have no right to speak to me like this. I have every right, Frederick snapped, crossing his arms. This is my business, not a charity for mine owners handed an empire by their father who think marrying off their rebellious daughters entitles them to special treatment. My father opened and closed his mouth like a fish, slowly running out of air. He was shaking now, and I couldn't help but feel some satisfaction at watching him, for once in his life, understand what helplessness felt like. Fine, we'll discuss this another time. Then he turned his attention to me. I came to see my daughter and my grandson. The topic of rates can wait. I'm fine. As is Benjamin, I said. I've come all this way, and I'd like to at least hold my grandson before I head back. He's napping, I said. He forced a smile. Napping? Well, surely we can wake him briefly so that I can hold him. No, I said. He needs his rest. You can come back another time. Maybe if you announce your visit first, we can arrange his sleeping schedule in advance. His jaw tightened, and he looked down at me with that all-too-familiar expression of indignation. I was not allowed to speak to him this way, and I never was. The punishment would have been severe. You are my daughter, and if I ask you to go get my grandson so I can hold him, then... Are you deaf? Frederick asked through clenched teeth. What do you not understand about the importance of a baby's rest? Now, see here, Frederick, my father said, turning sharply to face him with a brief surge of courage that faded almost as quickly as it appeared. No, you see here, Frederick said, moving toward him. You've arrived unannounced, asked me for absurd business favors, then spoken to your daughter as though she were unmarried right in front of her husband? Who do you think you are? I'm her father. I am her husband, and she is the mother of my son. You being her father ceased to matter when she and I married. She lives under my authority now. The only thing you have permission to do in my home right now is leave, which you will do promptly. Let's be reasonable, my father said, raising his hands. Frederick reached out, grabbing him by the back of his collar like a disobedient child, and began marching him toward the door. Let go of me this instant, he protested, but was unable to free himself from Frederick's grip. "You wish to see Benjamin? Do as his mother suggested and make an appointment, like anyone with half a brain would. You want better rates for my lumber? Offer me something in return. You want to be shown respect in my home? Try showing some first." Susie had opened the door, but backed as far out of the way as possible without so much as looking at either man. When they reached the door, Frederick sent him out with a hard shove. My father nearly fell but caught himself. "This conversation isn't over, Frederick," he said. "It is. And if you're unable to accept that, perhaps I'll have Mr. Morrison show you out next time." Frederick gripped the door, and for a moment I thought he'd slam it. But he seemed to remember Benjamin napping before he did. He closed it gently, turning and taking a few steps toward me. I braced myself to accept the blame for causing the situation in the first place. I hadn't, of course. That's what Frederick always seemed to do with anything that involved me at all. Somehow I'd caused it. I said the wrong thing, didn't listen, or some other excuse. Instead, he rubbed his nose and looked almost sympathetic. "Your father is a weak, pathetic man who thinks the world owes him something just because he was handed an empire by your grandfather. I can only pray my own son doesn't have the same sickness of the mind." I said nothing, afraid of saying the wrong thing. And besides, in this case, it's not like anything he said was untrue. He continued, "And he is not welcome here anymore. Certainly not without an appointment, and not at all until I say otherwise." He walked past me toward his study. "Inform the servants. If they allow him in without my permission, there will be consequences." "Yes, Frederick," I said. He paused in the doorway, glancing back at me over his shoulder. "You were right to refuse him. A baby's sleep is important. It seems you're finally learning how to be a proper mother." He left without giving me a chance to reply, though I had no desire to accept his backhanded compliment. After a moment, Camilla appeared at my side. "That was so very entertaining," she said quietly, after making sure no one else was around. "The look on your father's face." She flashed me a mischievous grin. I smiled, finding it hard to disagree. His anger was just directed at the right person, for once. "Perhaps creating an opportunity," she said, shrugging. "Perhaps." As she walked away to resume her duties, I considered that. She seemed to be implying that my father might help me escape Frederick, but even if that happened, where would I end up next? No. I would never accept help from a man who treated me like property my entire life. If we were going to find a way out, we'd do it on our own. If you're enjoying our audio content, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help out the channel.